I'm pretty sure everybody has heard a lot of nice things about Silicon Valley, how great it is, how awesome it is, how amazing it's like entrepreneurship and companies and electronic arts world, etc. So for that specific crowd, for ourselves, I decided to have a very different angle, saying, what's great about us here in Lithuania, even relative to Silicon Valley, because I think every single country has its own advantages. Apparently, the first rule of business says never run against a train head to head. So never try to compete with Silicon Valley or France or Britain or anywhere else on the verticals and the areas where we are strongest, and try to use your own advantages. And this is how you add to the whole value. So I decided to sum up some of the very practical things that I observed here in Lithuania and explain you guys and the visiting guests why not only I'm talking about that, but am I putting my own money back into the country and firmly believing that this is a really good opportunity to invest. So to start with, this is something pretty commonly known and communicated by the government. Lithuania does have great infrastructure. Believe it or not, but it's last 7 years it's been competing for the fastest internet in the world with South Korea. So at home I do have 300 megabytes per second fiber optics line, and with all respect to Silicon Valley, that's sometimes not always the case. Average internet speed in Silicon Valley, because it's big, because apparently the telecoms are, have to take a little bit more money to invest and cover the area, for better or worse, but we do have it here. So that means itself it's nice, of course, it means the movies are loaded fast, etc. But for, I don't mean torrents. Maybe sometimes. Just because Apple, wasn't fast enough to make it here to Lithuania, of course. But to really understand what it means that if you are a startup or a VC and if you're contemplating, which businesses to launch or to support, that means here in Lithuania we can launch next generation Netflixes that run Ultra HD movies super fast, because we have infrastructure, we have a market, we have the people. Again, with all respect to Silicon Valley, this is very, very difficult to do because you simply don't have infrastructure and don't have a market for that yet. So that means, yes, on the top of that best infrastructure, we can experiment a little bit with the technologies that are yet to come to the rest other parts of the world. Just to illustrate that point, I had a very interesting discussion, panel discussion a couple of years ago in the DLD conference in Munich, and it was built around a very interesting topic. A couple of years ago, believe it or not, top 10 iOS applications were developed exclusively in Eastern European/Scandinavian region. So all the Rovios of the world, all the Talking Tomcats, etc., were all Eastern European/Scandinavian Finnish products, and not a single one came from Silicon Valley, and we were discussing why. And the conclusions and the feedback from a company like Rovio was very simple, saying, hey, the mobile internet started in our part of the world with Nokia, and that was 2001. And it took 7 years for US to launch the iPhone, and this is where officially the whole mobile development and the craziness started. But we had the 6 years window of opportunity where we knew how to develop for Symbian devices, for Nokia devices. Every people would use them. But in America, they were not available. Therefore, game developers, did not how to develop. They knew how to develop awesome 3D racing games, soccer simulators that takes years to develop. But it's a very difficult world when you develop for a mobile device, where you have to take advantage of every single pixel and every single small processor operation. And again, only after you have this experience of developing 6 years for Nokia, you can develop something which is designed originally for a mobile phone. Taking advantage of all the unique stuff about that. So that means, again, on the back of those things, we can flirt with some of the technologies and areas and ideas that are simply not yet possible in Silicon Valley. Apparently, mobile data, mobile internet in the EU and in Lithuania in particular is extremely high. If you look at all official charts, one of the biggest regional conglomerates of the telecoms, Telesonero, recognizes officially that Omnitel actually hits all the best top lines, by penetration, by usage, by SIM cards, etc., etc. So it's fine to have it as %. It's nice to be a user, but definitely there is a possibility to use that for business and for investment. So definitely we have a very strong tech community. I call it the hacker generation, and again, probably those sitting here will understand me. that, for better or worse, we had, say, 10, 20 years of what I call the easy access to software. Of course, for educational purpose. Right? So when you have played all the 1001 game available in the market, because it's, again, for educational purposes available, only then you can develop a 1002nd game where you say, yes, I understood what it means to actually write a game. I've taken every single best thing out of those 1000 games, and then I implemented my my game, which implements all of that knowledge. Only after you have that experience, you can launch that. Only after you have installed Windows multiple times, you actually are prepared to use internet banking, which is not straightforward. And that's one of the reasons why, for example, Lithuanian users had no issue of hooking the Nokia phones onto the internet. Actually, I mean, it did require an engineering degree because of setting up its DNS servers, the access points, etc., etc. It was not straightforward, but apparently, when you've done the Windows installation 10 times all over, say, well, probably technology is like that, and no problem. I need internet banking to set up, my accesses, key securities, etc. I know how to do that. And again, the community in the US and in the Western world, which is used to things being super easy, not necessarily adopts the technology that fast. And again, that's leading, again, itself is nice when you know how to work with technology, but again, from specifically VC, the business perspective, it means two very fundamental, interesting things. One is the market is ready to accept new technology, even when it's not as friendly as the iPhone. And that's important because that's the, by any definition of economic tech, that means the early adoptive community. And if a country has that, that means, again, some next gen, some not yet, super easy, super user-friendly products can be launched and used here and polished. So by the time the iPhone takes over in the US, you already have the Angry Birds game, which is polished all over because you've had those 6 years of early adoption. And that is important. And apparently, only after you played those 1000 games, only then I think you can say, yes, I know what it means to write again. I can produce something which will be as good as anything that's written before me. Well, I skip the part which is self-apparent for a small country. It's very easy to run pretty flexible regulations and laws, and therefore we do have e-government, we do have the e-city. When I tell in Silicon Valley what we kind of used to pay for parking with SMS text messages, and now we just do it with a single iPhone swipe. Very often I hear a surprise, why in hell in San Francisco we cannot do that? I don't know if any of you tried to park a car in San Francisco, you are never have those quarters because, excuse me, but coins is so last stage, you never have them. and the parking machine would not accept anything else. There is a parking application which requires you to hook and validate your credit card, and then send a text message authorizing the bank to process your credit card to pay for your parking. But apparently, for American banks, European credit cards simply don't exist because you need to input your zip code, and apparently, unless you put that, the credit card is not validated, and European zip codes somehow are not recognized in the US with all respect to the American banking system. So for a European, there's just not a single simple way to pay for parking at all, period. So when I tell them, hey, isn't it like a simple, swipe? That's surprising. But, I'm just trying to illustrate that, that specific services, I know, been in Lithuania for what, 5 years? Something like that. So we have those things. And that means, again, if you're running a startup which, capitalizes, we have the city API where any single one can hook into and develop their own version of parking application because it's a public service provided by the city. So if you're developing, the next generation parking app, then you can experiment and do and actually have a market and revenue, etc. In Lithuania, you cannot probably for the next 5 years to have that in the US. So why don't capitalize on that? Startups are becoming hot. That is a specifically and particularly very awesome thing because 5 years ago when we were fundraising for the first time, it was so uncommon that, again, believe it or not, it took us 7 months to close our first Series A with Excel partners out of London because that was the first ever venture capital deal in Lithuania. The government had no idea how to treat that investment. The tax agency couldn't say whether it's a capital gain or not, and can we flip a company to UK or we cannot, etc. So we use a ton of legal advice and ton of pressure to validate, a single VC transaction. As I know in Silicon Valley, those things happen much faster. So today it's a very different world. Today we have agencies working on that, how you bring more of those investments, how you make them easier. Every second university student has understanding what is Series A, Series B, what is a VC. And that wasn't the case, I know, not that long while ago. Again, I sometimes joke that although I had 6 years of education in the University of Economics here in Vilnius, not a single one I heard the word VC, period. So to me it's a little bit apparently wrong. I mean, you cannot teach economics and just forget the whole VC concept as it is, like, altogether. So this is changing, and startups are hot, and I think this is definitely adding to the whole community. So there are a ton of small market advantages, and probably if you ask me what's the single biggest, most important thing that I value a lot about this country, that's definitely small market. So that means with a single press release, you can reach a critical user mass for any service. It will probably take $1 million or so US in Silicon Valley to be somewhat known at all. So there is not enough attention of big companies, again, like Apple. Absence of Apple service here enabled a lot of businesses around. Lack of Google and Amazon, etc. support enables us to do some things here in Lithuania which do not compete with all those large companies. So we can, like, relatively easily to do things that in the market which is not addressed properly by all the big guys, and therefore it's much easier for me. You can try to do something where Google has ambition for in Silicon Valley, like like the payments, the Google Pay or things like that. Good luck, because apparently that's tough and covered. Now I'm moving into a little bit more specific stuff, but it is also very important. And I promise that's my last slide, so I'll keep you much. But the one thing I discovered in the last year only is that for any startup, it's not possible to exist in vacuum. It always brings links and relationships. And very often, startups are complementary to some other service. Just to illustrate, we have one startup that we're investing into is a loyalty program which is linked to your bank cards. And that requires a pretty deep integration into banking systems. We need to integrate our piece of software right into the point-of-sale terminal, so at any single time somebody swipes, we can read the signal, interpret the signal, and basically apply our math, logic, etc. To the transaction to identify if that specific person can be qualified for a specific discount based on his loyalty, presence, preferences, etc., etc. So in the US, with all respect to the community there, but going to Bank of America and asking, say, hey, I'm like a little startup, and I need to intercept every single credit card swipe, that's like a suicide. Because that's not possible, it's not happening. Apparently there are huge corporations, security credit cards is one of the most conservative business areas in the world, but guess what? In Lithuania that is possible, because that is a small country, because everybody is a lunch away from anybody else, and you just sit down with you guys and say, hey, we're developing that. It's a small market, so your risk to your group or whatever is relatively small, and we're innovative, so let's just do like that. So I think it's a perfect balance. On the one hand, most of the businesses that are infrastructural actually run by foreign companies, like banking systems, processors, etc. So that means that we don't have to deal with something local which would never scale globally. But the local branches are given enough authority to decide locally that yes, we want to work with that startup. I think it's a perfect balance. And for a startup means that if you're working on something pretty sophisticated, like linking into banks, yes, you can, like in a meaningful time frame, like 6 months or so, develop that partnership here in Lithuania. And no, you cannot do those things easily in Silicon Valley, whatever the budget, because it's a big country, big corporations, really slow conversations, and that's one of the reasons why things like that are like so difficult to do there in Silicon Valley. And apparently, if you talk to like international bank and say, hey, we want to try that thing in a small Lithuania, that is a much safer partnership for a bank than say, hey, we want to launch this like little thing for Pizza Hut all over US, with potentially like I don't know, like having a billion exposure to lawsuits and things like that. So yes, it's much easier to do those things here in Lithuania. And apparently, again, every single country has its own verticals where it's like way advanced. Everybody else do think that Lithuania has very specific verticals. I already mentioned banking, I think mobile, and apparently there are biotech and solar energy. Very specific, very narrow areas where we have an edge, even relative to Silicon Valley. So apparently focusing on those as opposed to trying to produce wine and compete with winemakers of France with 200 years of experience, makes a little bit more sense because we just have a little bit more chance to succeed in those specific narrow areas. And what seems to be becoming a trend, the last thing not apparently released, is Lithuania does start to consolidate some of the industry around the region. And the best example is gaming. Gaming didn't really exist in Lithuania until probably a year ago, and recently we've seen big companies like Game Insight moving into Lithuania. Again, from business perspective, I think this is awesome as we are becoming a regional center for some of those verticals, and I think apparently taking advantage of that makes a lot of sense.